Welcome to the Ncast, where we bring you conversations with people who live and breathe compliance, risk management, and governance in financial services. I'm Rafael Deleon, Senior Vice President of Industry Relations at Ncontracts. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to someone whose journey through banking mirrors what so many compliance professionals experience. Ashley Przada spent 14 years in the banking industry, working everywhere from local credit union to two of the big five U.S. banks before returning to community banking as a compliance and BSA officer. She knows what it's like to wear multiple hats, to inherit spreadsheets with no documentation, and to lie awake wondering, what am I missing? Now, Ashley has joined Ncontracts as an account executive, bringing that frontline perspective to help institutions facing the same challenges she once navigated daily. In today's conversation, we'll talk about how she accidentally fell into compliance, what recent exams are really focusing on, and why burnout is hitting the profession so hard, and what she wishes she could tell her former self. So let's get into it. Welcome to today's Ncast. Today, my guest is Ashley Przada, a former compliance and BSA officer who is now serving as an account executive at Ncontracts, and where we're partnering with banks and credit unions on compliance, risk management, and governance. Ashley brings 14 plus years of experience in banking, and she brings a practical, informed perspective that's grounded in real regulatory expectation and operational risk. So I'm glad to welcome you to our Ncast today, Ashley. Welcome.
Oh, thanks, Rafael. I'm happy to be here.
As you know, today I want to go through a few questions with you, just kind of about your background and kind of your experience and what brought you here to Ncontracts. So what drew you to compliance work originally, and what type of institutions did you work with?
Yeah, Rafael. So I actually started in banking in high school as an intern at a local credit union. And then I just stayed there throughout college, working my way up. And from there, I moved on to a few larger institutions. I actually worked for two of the big five US banks. And then I eventually came back to a community bank here in St. Louis. And then I will say I did not start in compliance. My introduction to compliance, I would say, happened by accident. I got pulled into a project attached to a consent order that the bank I was with was under. And at that point, I had no exposure to regulatory compliance. But once I saw that the work was so impactful, it just made sense for me to stay there, and I got hooked to it.
So even coming as a high school intern, how did that decision come about? How did you end up? Because it's one of the questions I ask most people about, one, how you got into banking, because it's never, rarely is it, I might be an exception, that you wake up and like, oh, I want to be in banking because my father was in banking. So I knew that path and understood it and spent a lot of time. Tell us about how that decision came about even in high school.
Yeah, so like you, Rafael, it was not something I had planned. And unlike you, though, I had no exposure to banking, and I was in a business class. And the teacher gave us an opportunity. She had a few internships that were available that she let the whole class interview for. And I was selected after my interview for a local credit union to get into their indirect loan processing department, where we did car loans. And so, yeah, I just ended up there. I did not plan to stay there for 14 years in the industry, but here I am. I guess it worked out.
So, what really kept you in, is it your knowledge of what you were working on? Give me a sense of that for especially our listeners.
Yeah, so I will say, until I got into compliance, I wasn't very attached to the industry, if we're being honest.
Okay.
But once I got exposure to that, I was like, wow, this is something meaningful. This is making a difference. I feel that I'm helping, the bank stay safe. And I really liked the research piece of it, the project management piece of it. And yeah, it just really worked out, and I enjoyed the work. I loved it. I've always had a knack for US law and business law, so this kind of tied into that a little bit with all the regulatory exposure. So I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's great. So as a compliance officer, walk us through your typical day or week, what you encountered.
Yeah, well, I will say, my role not only, covered compliance, I was also the BSA officer. I also was in charge of vendor management and a few other areas. So no 2 days really looked the same. Obviously involved in a lot of things. So I think when you're wearing that many hats and responsible for such critical areas in an institution, what really kept me up at night was just the thought of what am I missing? There's so much to manage. And even when things are going great, there's still just that nagging thought in the back of your head saying, is something slipping through the cracks? What changed that I miss? What should I be focused on tomorrow? So I think that is probably true to a lot of people working in compliance is there something I'm forgetting?
You talked about you were at a range of different institutions, and what was that like? And especially when you brought up a good point, what kept you up at night? Were there processes and systems that you were working with, or did you have to create those from scratch? How did that work? Or was it a combination?
Yeah, it was definitely a combination. And I will say, I think it was quite an adjustment going from, I started at a smaller institution, moved to some big ones, and then went back to a smaller institution. And once you get used to the tools available to you at those huge institutions, and the dynamic is much different than coming into a smaller institution, it was a lot more manual work, a lot more building things out. So that was an adjustment that I think a lot of community bankers can relate to as well.
No, definitely. We see that, and a lot of other people, once you've seen processes and systems and tools that people are using, especially at larger institution, coming back to a smaller institution can be a challenge of having to kind of, all right, I know what's out there, but this is what I'm having to do. So you were building from the ground up. You really had to understand what you were doing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I came in as the compliance and BSA officer at the community institution I worked for, they had not previously had, I will say, a dedicated compliance and BSA officer. It was people working in other areas of the banks that just wore those hats additionally. So I think it was a big culture shock for not only myself, but my fellow colleagues that had never had someone that was solely focused on those areas. So I would say, there were challenges there, just getting everyone up to speed and building those relationships and those partnerships, and getting people on board that compliance isn't the enemy. I'm here to
Good.
help. So yeah.
So, just kind of off the cuff here, we've had a recent survey on the future of compliance and asking compliance practitioners to give us feedback. And one of the things that we noticed especially that changed over the last 5 years, was Bank Secrecy Act was not on the list of top concerns. And I really addressed that to that there was more maturity in this area because there were also heavy penalties and fines associated with noncompliance. Give me your experience of that and what you saw at your institution.
Yeah, so I feel like I came in at an interesting time, Rafael, that, it hadn't been a huge topic of conversation, hadn't been a concern. And I remember, I think I was about 6 months in, and we had our first safety and soundness exam since me being there. And the previous BSA officer said, oh, they don't really look at BSA. You'll be fine. And he went to Jamaica on a trip. And so I was on my own, and it was everything but fine. They did a deep dive. And I saw that trend continue. They really looked at everything. They said, this is where we're focusing our concerns on now. We may be removing some guidance from other areas, and loosening the reins there. But BSA is still top of mind. I mean, we saw, I think in 2024, the largest BSA fines that had ever incurred by an institution. And really, those fines are coming from not necessarily doing anything bad, but not doing enough and not managing those risks. And I think that's been a solid trend over the last few years, is they're really concerned about, are you identifying the risks that are in your institutions? A lot of institutions have a lot of BSA, AML risks. And what are you doing about it?
Right. So, with that, you were having to deal with the examiners regularly and having been on that side. So you and I get to kind of share that kind of experience. What was your relationship like with examiners when they came through your institution?
Yeah, Yeah, so I'd say overall, I had a solid working relationship with the examiners that would come on site and work with us, and even the ones that worked remotely. But over time, I will say I did find myself spending more effort helping the examiners and guiding them through that examination process than we had previously. A lot of the more seasoned examiners have retired, left the industry, and then the teams are thinner now. So I think that they're struggling on their end too. So it was left up to us to help guide them through that process more.
And so you were telling me when you came on board with us just in the last few months about a recent exam experience. Can you share what that was like? Because I have a lot of bankers saying, what are the examiners now looking for? And you were just dealing with that up until what month were you there during your exam?
December. So
Okay.
very, very recently. Yes, we went through, and that particular experience, what really stood out there is that the examiners went very deep into fair lending and discrimination risk, which was surprising because we were a commercial only lending institution. So we did not do any consumer lending. So fair lending and discrimination hadn't really been a talking point for us in the past. And it had never been flagged on any of our exams or even looked at prior to that. And they really did dive deep. We did eventually align on our thoughts, but it just really reinforced what I said previously about BSA is that they were more concerned with, hey, have you identified that this risk does exist? And how are you managing that risk? What are you doing? Are you talking about it to leadership? Board aware? What's your plan going forward? So they really want institutions to be more proactive with identifying the risks that they have, and they're not so much focusing on the transactional reviews that they used to conduct.
And I can say from my own past experience, and even when I started as an examiner, you know, over 30 years ago, what that was like. We were also dealing with a very challenging environment at that time with a lot of banks that were failing because of credit issues down in Texas. And so it really came that we didn't spend a lot of time in institutions, but we were looking at their processes and systems. And that's very much what you were encountering. And you were also encountering a lot of young examiners as well.
Yeah, a lot of young examiners. And they're great, they're eager to learn, but they just, with years and years of experience just comes a lot of knowledge that isn't being, I think, passed down as much because a lot of their, like I said, more seasoned examiners have left now.
Right. And that's the value, I think, for any compliance or risk officer is building that relationship with their examiners and helping to educate them. And the way I talk about it is you want to be ready to tell your story to the examiners. They have a limited amount of time when they get to an institution to look and assess at risk in all different areas and really looking at those processes that are helping to identify risk so that the board and management have a clear understanding of where that risk is. So you were very much in that. So what tools or processes did you wish that you had, but simply didn't exist or weren't available to you?
Yeah, so I do think I had some really good tools that we had access to and were using, but I did not have a full suite that worked, comprehensively together. So I think if I had something that worked together in one place, that would have made a big difference. Also, pulling the reporting and showing the examiners the whole picture, I think having that whole suite would be very helpful, especially in smaller institutions that don't have access to nearly as many resources. They don't have compliance departments of 25, 30, 100. It's typically 1-2 man shops. So having good tools is really valuable.
And we've seen that again in that future of compliance survey that is the average for most institutions, even getting up to about 10 billion, that it's 1 to 2 people. So it really talks about even as assets increase and there's a complexity increase in terms of the profile that you're looking at, but all of these institutions need to run better with processes and tools. Tell us what some of those challenges were that you had with spreadsheets and trying to keep everything identified.
Yeah, so I think we see that all the time, right? Everyone's like, oh, well, we just manage it on a spreadsheet. And that can work, up to a certain point. But then you get into issues of that's a lot of manual work behind it. And there is a lot of human error that happens. You have so much going on in your world. You forget to log certain things. Something doesn't get updated. I've ran into issues where I go in to pull my audit log and it was gone, disappeared because someone else got into it, somehow deleted it, moved it. We were able to recover it, but it was completely disordered. So we had to go back in the archives and look at the one reported to the board 3 months ago and then make updates from there. So there's just so many risks around the manual record keeping of those things. It's a lot to bear. That's why, I think it's very valuable to have systems to help you with that.
Yeah, and my experience has been it's having to follow up and work with somebody that had a spreadsheet or their own tools developed in Word or Excel, and then trying to figure out what their thinking was in developing that, especially if they've left the institution and you're stepping in those roles. Where were certain things filed? What are the source documents? How did somebody look at risk in the previous years? And I'm sure you experienced that. Can you give us any flavor of that you walked into?
Yeah, and that's a really good thought, Raphael. Like you said, when you're building these out, typically it's a one-man job. And there were quite a few instances where I came in and the person who handled it before was no longer available or hadn't touched it for so long that they don't even recall why they did it a certain way or where certain pieces were placed. And I think it's because of that when you have your manual processes, that methodology isn't documented anywhere. It's all in someone's head. Whoever created it, they just know, hopefully they'll remember tomorrow. Maybe not. Maybe they won't touch something for 6 months and then who knows what happened there. So I think that is something to really take into consideration, is documenting that methodology used when, tracking things and assigning tasks and things like that.
So your profile and your background really kind of fits well into our, again, I keep referencing our Future of Compliance survey because it is so relevant. We're there. And the average age and experience of compliance examiners. And you don't have to share names of other people that you're talking to. Did you see a lot of turnover at different institutions, or were you talking to compliance officers at other institutions who were frustrated because they were staying up late trying to keep everything pulled together, and also, like you said, worrying about what did you miss, and that was keeping you up at night?
Yeah, I will say you see a lot of burnout in the compliance world. I don't know if it just comes with the territory or people are just spread too thin. I think, though, that I've seen a change in leadership. They say tone from the top, that, executives are starting to recognize that people are being burnt out. This is too much for one person to manage, especially managing in their head on their own. So they are taking the time to invest more because they're losing people.
Right.
So they're investing in more resources. They're investing in better tools to help keep those people in their organizations and keep that experience in-house so they can use it to their advantage.
When we talk about this talent challenge that is out there, and that I think that is one of the issues that most community financial institutions are dealing with. Maybe someone like yourself who was working at a larger institution comes in and starts talking and maybe looking at applying for the job, but only to come find out they didn't have the tools and solutions you were using, and you've got to go back and build it, and then trying to evaluate, is this worth my time, energy, and effort to spend here? Was that your experience as well?
Yes, I will say that's not something that you initially think of, especially when you're used to being at a larger institution. You just kind of assume that these processes and tools exist everywhere until you jump in and you realize, oh, they don't have any of this. They don't follow this guideline. They don't care about this risk that is so commonly expected at a larger institution. And having to not even just build out the tools, but build out the dynamics between the teams and build those relationships and those communications. It's a lot of work. I know I found myself, and I love my previous company and they were fantastic, but there were many days in the beginning that I said, this is too much. I have the expertise in the field. I can't build this myself, though. I've never done that. But compliance officers, they just figure it out. So.
Yep. No, they do, and they leverage those resources. But I think, again, you bring up, I can't You bring up a good point in terms of this, and this is what I talk about when there's been, an institution has lost a compliance officer, and they're talking to us about solutions, and they're like, this is a big lift for somebody that is one starting new, and then if you don't already have a tool for them to use, but you're asking them to evaluate something new. Maybe you knew of something, but that's a lot of responsibility on one person's shoulders to figure out, am I moving the bank in the right direction or the institution in the right direction or not? Was that, and again, did you experience some of that ever in your career?
Yes, I definitely did. And I think a lot of people feel that way working for a community institution is that, am I aligning to the goals here? Am I doing everything I need to be doing? It's a lot of responsibility to fall onto one person or a small team's shoulders to kind of figure that out and manage and align strategically as well. So I think that is a consideration that people are constantly thinking about in the compliance space.
Well, you touched on kind of working with teams and working with people across the organization at the institution you were at. As a compliance officer, how did you handle the real tension between the business teams who might have wanted to move fast and compliance who was ready to pump the brakes, and also address that compliance is not being seen as the department of no? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think that, that is one of the biggest hurdles being in compliance is that you have to build that relationship and you don't want to be a roadblock for the initiatives that your team is trying to, take on. You want to be support, you want to help them through it. So I think you have to start engaging in those conversations and let that be known early. Hey, I'm here to help. I want to make sure that we are making these decisions and we are doing it in a safe and compliant manner. I'm not saying no, I'm saying, yep, we can do it, but here is the guidelines that we have to follow in order to do it. So I think having those conversations and building those relationships, the teams will start, respecting you and more willingly come to you and ask, hey, what do we have to do to get this done? So as long as you're building more of a partnership instead of, being a roadblock saying no, I think it's so important. And that really does build that trust between the teams.
Yeah. In the short time you've been here, I think you can agree with me that we're fortunate here in Ncontracts to have a lot of people that are supporting us, like yourself and myself, who have backgrounds and ties in financial institutions. Again, whether it was my experience as an examiner, yours as a compliance officer, but we don't often see that in the sales area. So how does your frontline experience really shape how you think about the solutions we build and the way we support clients?
Yeah, so honestly, I think being on the other side of the table definitely gives me a completely different perspective than most folks. With that, I really understand that the pressure that compliance officers, risk professionals are under and that they face every day. And I know because I've worked with these tools, the value that they bring to these teams, because I've used them, I've needed them myself. So it really makes me appreciate the level of expertise that goes into building these solutions out and how much they work in this environment in the regulatory space.
And so when you talk to compliance officers now, what do you find yourself saying that only somebody who sat as a compliance officer is talking about and bringing to their awareness?
Yeah, I think we hear a lot of how thin compliance officers are stretched, and it's almost we're desensitized to it, right? But I think I can really honestly, truly relate to that and feel the seriousness of it. I understand that the challenges they're facing and how thin they're being stretched, and I don't have to guess what is important to them. And I think having that shared experience and really being empathetic to it helps us build trust.
Well, you lived it day in and day out, and again, as some of the backgrounds that we were talking about. So now on this side, are there things you see clients struggling with today that feel familiar from your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we often hear the term too, wearing a lot of hats or wearing too many hats. And I think seeing it from the other side, that is still just a huge challenge in this space. And finding efficiencies isn't just a nice to have anymore. It's essential if you want to run effectively without burning people out, like I was mentioning earlier. I think it's very crucial to find those efficiencies and put them into place before, you lose good talent.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the things for myself as a director I am concerned about, is our talent in the compliance area. I don't want to lose them. And the fact that people are getting burnt out may not always get to my attention. What are ways you would suggest to other compliance officers to raise that to the C-suite or others so they really understand how you're being stretched either too thin and the frustrations and challenges you're dealing with?
Yeah, well, I think communication is key. A lot of people run into issues of being people pleasers and wanting to prove their worth. Your expertise in the job you're doing speaks for itself. That doesn't mean you aren't allowed to be stretched too thin or stressed out. So expressing that, I think you have to bring that up. You have to bring up if you have solutions in mind that you think would be helpful to you, ask for them. You might be surprised in how willing they are to help you. They would rather, allocate some funds to a software that's going to help you than to lose you and have to replace you. So I think just being open and communicative with leadership is so important. I know examiners are really stressing having compliance and risk professionals having a seat at the table. Use that opportunity. Speak up. Tell them when you need help.
So I was fortunate to meet you, before you started working with us at Ncontracts, and I met you at the ABA Risk and Compliance Conference, and then at our user conference. So you were a user of our tools and solutions.
Was for quite a few years.
So what made you decide to move from the bank side to a technology provider and in sales?
Yeah, so honestly, Rafael, it's just as shocking to me as it may sound to anyone else. I fully expected after, probably being in banking for 10 years that I would spend my whole career in banking. It was all I really knew. I grew up in this industry. But when the opportunity came up to help banks from a different angle, especially by supporting the people who face the same challenges that I have always faced, it just felt like a natural step. And especially with Ncontracts, I think that it's a great company and they really do bring a lot of help and solutions to the field and this industry. So it just seemed like the best place to be.
That was very much my experience as well. After 32 years of my experience just as a regulator, and then having started working in financial institutions when I was in high school as well, and then also through college. And then, now on this other side of working for Ncontracts, it's very much about I'm passionate about the industry. I want to see the industry survive. I like the value proposition that Ncontracts provides and the tools and solutions. So our stories are very different, same, even though we're coming at it from different points. But my next question is, was there a moment, or frustration that really kind of helped to kind of crystallize your decision to come to Ncontracts?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there was a frustration. Compliance officers are constantly frustrated. You get used to that. But I will say, and this might sound cliche, but I met you, Rafael, at the Engage conference as a user back in the fall. And that really solidified, my desire to make the change, seeing all the passion, the expertise, and the care for the industry. It just became clear that this wasn't a normal software company that was just trying to sell you something pretty. It showed that, the people that work for Ncontracts are deeply invested in the success of the institutions that they serve. And I said, this is something I want to be a part of. And that's really what did it for me.
Well, I appreciate it from my vantage point, and I know as a company, we are too, but I just want to go back just to reinforce that Engage is our user conference that we hold every year in October. And this past year, over the past 5 years that I've been here. This past year, where you were there, was sold out, and I think it is. You can verify this for me. I think it's excellent having risk professionals who are talking to other risk professionals, but also using our tools and solutions. Tell me about those types of conversations that you had this past year in October.
Yeah, I will say, I think out of every banking conference I have been to, Engage was the most beneficial and the best organized conference I had attended. I think, Ncontracts does a great job. They make sure sessions are very valuable. Some are with industry experts like yourself, and those are always great and very engaging and informative. But also, yeah, from a user experience, you learn so much, and it gives you a good opportunity to see how the other institutions, in the country are using those tools to their advantage. And it was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot.
That experience of I started in June of 2021, Engage came up in October. And what really kind of brought things together as I'm learning about the company is seeing the passion of the customers that we have, and how they're talking and learning from all of us and information. But it was, I really learned more about our tools and solutions from compliance and risk officers who were using them. And I think we still find those things out every day. Was that your experience as well?
Yes, and even more so now in the role I'm currently in, I get to talk to, compliance and risk folks all day who are using the solutions. And I'm thinking, dang it, I should have done what they're doing. That's a really good idea. And I think Engage is the perfect opportunity to learn those things and use them to their full capabilities, these solutions.
So looking ahead, what advice would you give to a compliance officer who's feeling overwhelmed right now, especially with AI, third-party risk, the regulatory uncertainty and patchwork of laws and regulations all converging?
Yeah, I will say, I know it's a crazy time, Rafael. We know it's like the Wild West out here right now, with everything going on and all the changes. But I think it's important to know, and what I would tell a compliance officer is, you're not alone in this. We are all feeling it together, especially with, like you said, AI, third-party risk, the regulatory uncertainty. I think right now is the most crucial time ever to be proactive. That's no longer optional. And I think you really need to lean into the tools and resources you have available to you and to make sure you are being proactive and being reactive. I think we're going to see a lot more institutions getting in trouble for that in these next few years.
And you saw that from your own experience, how the examiners were focused on the tools and systems that were helping the institution identify, measure, monitor, and control risk. So I think it's very important for younger examiners with less experience to really be able to understand that those systems, because these examiners, unlike myself, have grown up with a lot of systems and tools and phones that, back in my day, it was still a big chief tablet, that we kept track of things. And I don't even know if anybody would know what that is anymore. I'm dating myself. But so again, I appreciate your perspective there. If you could go back and tell yourself, your former compliance officer self, one thing, what would it be?
I think if I could go back and tell myself one thing, and I might have touched on this a bit earlier, but that it's okay to ask for help. And using efficiencies and tools isn't a shortcut, it's a necessity. You don't have to do everything manually and on your own to prove that you're doing it well. The right tools and support don't replace the knowledge and expertise you bring to the table, it amplifies it. So, yeah, just like I said, there is no shame in asking for help and using tools. That is what they are designed to do. And like you said, that's examiners want to see that you are using tools to help you. They know that these processes can't be handled manually anymore. And they're looking to see what you're doing about it.
Yeah. So, well, I wish you the best of luck, with us here at Ncontracts. I have told you that I'm personally, pulling for you and anything that I can do to help you in this area, because it is just great to have another practitioner, but also connecting on the sales side. How many sales calls have you been on that you could tell that the person did not know what they were talking about or the industry that they were talking to?
I think that's just typical when you get, and I will say that is a key difference in end contracts. I remember I sat on a few demos and sales calls, and you can tell, and it's almost frustrating, as a banker when a salesperson is trying to tell you how to do your job when you know that they've never done it. But that is, I think, a key difference that end contracts brings is that, a lot of who we have are ex bankers, ex examiners. They have the knowledge and they really do know what they're talking about and want to help. So I do think that makes all the difference, and it builds a much deeper level of trust in the solution.
Well, I thank you for your time. Are there any questions that you have for me?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on and speak with you, Rafael. I'm excited to work with you. You're one of the most passionate people I've seen in the space, so I'm just excited to learn from you.
Well, great. Anything I can do to help. Well, thank you for being our guest on this year's starting episode of the Ncast. Thank you.
Yes, thanks so much.
Wow, Ashley. Thank you for sharing the kind of real world insight that only comes from having lived it. Those late nights, the exam surprises, and the constant question of whether something is slipping through the cracks. I know we've all felt that. And if there's one theme that runs through our conversation, it's this: asking for help is not a weakness, and using the right tools isn't a shortcut. It's how you amplify the expertise you already bring to the table. I know examiners aren't looking for perfection. They're looking for institutions that have identified their risk and built processes to manage them. So, if you're a compliance or risk professional feeling stretched thin right now, you can see that you're not alone. Thanks for joining us on the Ncast. Until next time, stay proactive and engaged.